Have you ever contemplated the reasons behind certain women's choice to embrace solitude? No romantic partner, no companion, seemingly not even searching for one. The explanation doesn't stem from isolation, limited opportunities, or emotional wounds. It originates from something more challenging, more disturbing, something that dismantles everything society taught us about feminine expectations. Because when a woman decides to embrace independence, she isn't becoming lost. She's discovering her authentic self. And this type of self-exploration doesn't arrive with praise, social media validation, or companionship. It emerges through quietude, inner strength, and a form of liberation that most individuals still fail to comprehend. She isn't experiencing loneliness. She's being discerning. She isn't emotionally distant. She simply grew weary of igniting passion for individuals who never desired to experience that warmth. There's something deeply unsettling about a woman who doesn't require a romantic relationship to feel complete, because this destroys the framework of manipulation, tears down the illusion of emotional codependency, and exposes a harsh reality. Most men lack understanding of how to interact with a woman who doesn't need rescuing. And most women are still discovering how to recognize themselves in that quiet yet powerful reflection of strength. Carl Jung once observed that everything we reject within ourselves transforms into our shadow. And many of these independent women actually mirror the collective unconscious. They represent what many aspire to become, yet few possess the bravery to embody. They don't cry out for affection. They express their decisions quietly. They don't showcase themselves to capture attention. They withdraw to protect their essence. They're less concerned with fairy tale romances and more focused on their inner tranquility. And this disturbs people because while society demands urgency to find someone, these women have uncovered the strength of being with themselves. The woman who embraces solitude without a boyfriend isn't lost. She's functioning on a different plane, a plane where nothing is pleaded for. It's selected. Where validation isn't required, existence is sufficient. And perhaps that's why she generates so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to categorize or analyze her. But what many still fail to grasp is that behind her apparent withdrawal lies a presence that fulfills, that surpasses, that confronts the emotional established order. She doesn't desire just any form of affection. She seeks something that doesn't diminish her. And until that appears, she remains steadfast, whole, fulfilled. Perhaps you don't comprehend it at this moment. Perhaps you believe it's overstatement, arrogance, or concealed emotional damage. But deep within, far beneath the surface, there's an inquiry inside you, a subtle one that resonates even when you attempt to dismiss it. What if that quiet journey is actually the only one that guides to the most significant type of love, the one that begins with yourself? The quietude that envelops a woman who lives independently is not vacancy. It's a refuge. And those who don't recognize the worth of that space frequently label her as cold, remote, or even conceited. But what few individuals observe is that she didn't construct that stronghold to exclude the world. She built it to avoid losing herself. Carl Jung also stated that everything we don't confront in ourselves, we eventually project onto others. And perhaps that's why so many women still mistake solitude for emptiness, when in truth, It can be the nurturing foundation for self-exploration. While most people seek to fulfill themselves through external relationships, this woman directed her attention inward. And there, in the expanse of her own subconscious, she confronted the spirits she had avoided for years. Childhood injuries, unspoken abandonments, attachments masquerading as love. Her choice to be alone didn't emerge from an open wound, but from a scar that finally mended. She didn't cease believing in love. She just stopped accepting what others labeled love when it only made her feel diminished. This woman understands turmoil. She's loved until she disappeared. She's given excessively. She's pleaded for fragments that never should have been offered initially. But at some moment, she awakened. And that awakening wasn't instantaneous. It was a sequence of disappointments that ceased causing pain and began providing lessons. What you observe now isn't coldness, it's emotional development. And development is frightening because it requires presence, depth, and authenticity. She doesn't desire just any companionship. She seeks reciprocity. She's no longer drawn to commitments, but to genuine presence. So perhaps that's why she appears unreachable to many, because she doesn't want to be rescued. She wants to be understood, and that requires more than charm or pleasant words. It demands courage to explore the depths where few dare to venture, and that's where many surrender, not because she's challenging, but because she's complete. And when a woman becomes complete, she awakens two extremes in the world: admiration and terror. Admiration from those who are also pursuing that completeness. Terror from those who still exist in fragments, anticipating someone else to make them feel whole. She doesn't want to complete anyone. She wants to flourish alongside someone who has also discovered themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by destiny's caprice, but out of devotion to her own spirit. This woman isn't concealing. She's safeguarding herself. There's a significant distinction between withdrawing and preserving oneself. But the world doesn't readily accept a woman like this. A world that still promotes happily ever after only exists in partnerships. A world that distrusts those without a companion, as if that were an indication of failure. Carl Jung once stated that where conformity dominates, there's minimal space for genuineness, and this woman doesn't exist by conformity. She exists by essence. She hears expressions like, "You're too selective. You should be more receptive. Nobody's flawless." And she smiles, a peaceful, steady, almost ironic smile, because she understands what many call selective is simply the fundamental standard. The standard it took her decades to realize she merits. She's not seeking perfection. She's seeking someone mature enough to love without devastating. Someone who's completed the inner work she has already confronted. And let's be honest, that's not something you discover on just any street corner. The discomfort she creates isn't in what she expresses, it's in what she embodies. She's living evidence that it's possible to be content without depending on anyone else. And that removes facades. Men who thrive on female insecurity feel threatened. Women still trapped in the need for approval feel criticized. But she isn't here to challenge anyone. She's just existing. And the authenticity of someone who has liberated herself is by itself a harsh mirror to those still living in constraints. This woman isn't rushing. She doesn't need to accelerate things to satisfy anyone. She honors her own rhythm, and for that, she provokes a silent rage in a society that wants everything immediately. She desires depth while the world pursues distractions. She desires presence while the world offers only superficial availability. She yearns for soul-level connections while everyone else is attempting to appear interesting on the next social media post. And when she says no, it's not a strategy, it's truth. When she walks away, it's not theatrics, it's self-protection. When she chooses to remain home instead of going out with someone hollow, it's not arrogance, it's clarity. And that clarity earned through pain and surrender is her greatest revolution. Because she doesn't exist to please, she exists to be. And that simple act, being, is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Perhaps what disturbs people most about this woman isn't her solitude. It's the peace she's discovered within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey that she undertook. It wasn't simple. It was a demanding process of removing masks, facing the ghosts of emotional dependency, and reconstructing herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself through others' perspectives. She sees herself through her own eyes, and that transforms everything. How many times have you questioned if being alone is failure or freedom? How many times have you felt the need to justify yourself for not having someone by your side? This woman has experienced that too. She once believed there was something wrong with her for being alone in a world that worships couples, even unhappy ones. But one day, she realized it's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. And that day, she made a commitment with herself. Never again would she accept less than what she truly deserves. Her path is not a direct line. There are days of uncertainty, moments of longing, nights of profound silence. But there's also a strength that grows with each decision made in awareness. She learned that true love doesn't imprison, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she desires is the kind that liberates, that adds, that supports without suffocating. And until that love arrives, she chooses to keep growing independently, not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She shattered, faced her shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more complete than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone to share that awareness with. That's intimidating because it demands emotional responsibility. And sadly, few are willing to love responsibly. Most still love out of lack, out of possession, out of fear, and if she walks alone today, it's because every step echoes with learning. Every no she gives is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be pleaded for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. And that certainty born from the deepest part of her soul transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not the same woman who once begged to be loved. Something inside her broke, and it was precisely that break that set her free, because sometimes only in collapse does the soul find its new form. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what she lived through. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain, traumas that weren't just hers, but those of all the women who came before her. She broke cycles. She said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script. She learned that it wasn't her responsibility to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept crumbs out of fear of being alone. And when she stopped accepting less, the world tried to convince her she was wrong. But she stood her ground, first with uncertainty, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability, because someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. She learns to nourish herself with silence, to warm herself with her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth, not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to tell the difference between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth, and she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Her transformation isn't superficial. It's archetypal. It's as if she's tapped into an ancient wisdom, an old memory that women weren't born to serve, but to express, not to be shaped, but to overflow. And in accessing that memory, something awakened in her. A wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to reduce her with labels, cold, difficult, distant, nothing sticks, because she no longer lives to fit in. She lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention. She radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen. She does the choosing. And that reversal of logic confuses those who still try to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's already crossed the threshold. And on the other side, she discovered that the real relationship begins only after you've loved yourself enough to not need anyone. There's something sacred about the way she moves through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet, and it's in that silence that her true strength lives. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises or convince anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, she simply declines. She doesn't react with anger or bitterness. She steps away with the dignity of someone who's gotten lost too many times to let the same wound happen again. What few people understand is that this woman still longs for love. She still wants to be held, touched, chosen, but she wants it without losing herself, because she spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries. Now, she only offers herself where there's room to be whole. And that requires a level of maturity that goes far beyond romance. It requires awareness. It requires having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. She's not looking for fairy tales. She's looking for a soul alliance, a connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow beside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. And if that seems too much for some, so be it, because she'd rather wait than survive on emotional crumbs. And to many that sounds like arrogance, but it's really just self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman, a woman who has walked away from the superficial and dived into the depths, who got tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected, who chose to be alone not because she gave up on love, but because she began to understand that real love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that, her whole world begins to change. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before any words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts like something in the room realigns subtly but unmistakably. This isn't mysticism. It's energy. It's the weight of someone who has already faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace. Not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would say she found wholeness not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply learned not to submit to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She longs to love, but in a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm. Because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is. And those who demand constant sweetness still don't understand the beauty of bitterness, so necessary for growth that she's too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, and at the same time strong enough to keep choosing this path, even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood. That is the journey of an awakened soul, giving up instant validation in exchange for deeper truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her, women who don't need, women who don't bow, women who refuse to be molded because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that once said a woman only has worth if she is with someone. And when she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others. And that for the system is dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground, because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself. And after everything she's lived through, that is more than enough. The love that comes after that won't be salvation. It will be celebration. It won't come to fill her. It will come to overflow. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake. But deep down, she feels something aligning within her. It's not pride or rebellion. It's a rare kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence. The same wisdom Jung called individuation. The process of becoming fully who you are without masks, without compromise. And when that happens, nothing outside her has more power than the truth that pulses inside her chest. That truth doesn't need to shout. It can show itself in the way she quietly closes a door without resentment, in how she withdraws when the environment no longer nourishes her, in the way she smiles in peace, even with no one by her side, because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment. It's a vow of loyalty to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is, and that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princes, love made for display. But she's already seen behind the curtain. She's already understood. It's not about finding someone. It's about never losing yourself again. And when that realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment. Lack becomes choice. Waiting becomes a path. And what once hurt now teaches. What once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep inside, that stirring, that spark. Maybe it's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Maybe it's the image of a woman you once knew, or the woman you've become. In either case, something within you is asking to be seen more clearly. Something that no longer fits in old molds. Something that, if you let it, could completely transform how you relate to love, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without hurry, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, inviolable. And along that journey, she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. If something inside you was touched by this story, maybe it's because deep down, you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth. A love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't come yet, maybe it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. And if this message found you at the right moment or awakened someone you forgot was living inside you, then I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share this content with other women who need to remember their own strength. Engage with it, respond, and follow along. Not out of impulse, but out of choice. Because when something touches the soul, the least we can do is let it keep resonating within us and through us.